Hello, everyone. Welcome to Parent Chat. I'm so glad you're here. My name is Sherry Gazit. I am one of the proud members of the Balance in Mind team that brings you Parent Chat. We are very passionate about making sure that parents have the mental health resources that they need. Tonight, we are fortunate enough to have Ashley Bendixson as our speaker. She is fantastic and amazing, and I am really looking forward to learning from her. She's an award-winning activist, speaker, author, and an expert in mental health and abuse prevention and response. Additionally, she is the co-owner of an agency specializing in life coaching for teens and young adults. Her work comes from her own experience as a trauma survivor and the purpose she discovered in becoming an advocate for change. She's been on major news media, including the #1 true crime podcast on iTunes, and was featured in an 8-time award-winning documentary. She's also the founder of a global storytelling platform for abuse survivors, co-manages an online support group alongside a former lead from ABC's The Bachelorette, and is a former Miss Rhode Island. When she's not working, which it sounds like that's not often, you'll often find Ashley planning some kind of adventure, hiking, or riding her bike, journaling, hanging by the ocean where she lives, playing piano, or running late. But luckily, she's here on time tonight. So I'd love for everyone to welcome Ashley Bendixson, and we can welcome her if you have access to the reactions that are down below on your Zoom. All right, welcome, Ashley.
Hello, Sherry. Thank you so much for that introduction. How are you tonight?
Well, I'm sorry?
How are you tonight?
Doing great, and I am particularly doing well because you're here. And we worked hard to get you here because we are looking forward to the information you can give us about social media. As a parent and teen coach, that's probably the #1 question I get is about social media.
Yeah, well, it's something that is in many ways foreign to a lot of us who did not grow up with social media. I thank the heavens every day that I did not have social media as a teen. But you're right, this is such a complex, nuanced issue that can potentially have negative impacts on today's young people. So I'm really happy to be here with you and with everybody who's showing up on this call. I was told that it's a beautiful day out there, so thank you for choosing to still prioritize this event and really just prioritize your role as a parent. As you kind of heard from my bio, I am someone who travels the country and speaks. And one of my biggest gripes is often the lack of parental involvement. I'll speak to the students, I'll speak to the teachers, but rarely do parent events get organized. And if they do, sometimes very few show up. So, this is a big part of really taking care of today's young people, making sure that our youth are safe, our children are safe. So I just applaud you all for being here. And feel free to be active in the chat. I'll keep a little side eye on what's going on. But, I'd love to, if you want to in the next moment or so, leave a comment. Tell me who your kids are. How old are they? I'd love to know kind of what the parent scene looks like. So tell me how old your kids are, and that'll kind of help me inform my remarks even more closely to you and maybe what you're going through. But as you kind of heard, tonight's topic is about social media, the use of technology, and mental health. And I think there's a few different ways people tend to talk about this issue. Let me tell you what tonight's talk is not about. We will not be talking about these extreme levels of cyber crimes and online risks and predators and privacy and parental controls. That's a whole talk in and of itself. Tonight, we really wanted to focus on how everyday social media and technology use can have an impact on young people's mental health, their identity, their social emotional well-being, and really their academic, personal, and professional lives, because it's the everyday use that actually makes the larger impact. And this is why we all should be concerned about it. It's not always those big extreme cases, it's the little moments every day. Okay, I'm seeing some great energy in the chat. This is excellent. We have a nice range. I'm seeing 21, 8. That is quite a difference, Valerie. 4th grade, 6th grade. 2 boys, 13 and 9, 15 and 18. Excellent. So we've got some elementary age, tweens, preteens, teenagers. Okay, so this is excellent. As someone who speaks in schools and knows a lot about youth issues, I always say we can't teach this stuff early enough. So if you have children who are in elementary school, now is the time to start learning. And if your kids are in it and they're being social online, and this is a huge chunk of their lives, as you probably see, well, hopefully this conversation will be insightful as well. So that's the focus of tonight's talk. And I want to just take a moment to just give you a little bit of backstory on who I am and how I got into this whole world. I know you heard my bio, but I have a personal story as well. And I'd love to just share a little bit of that with you now. So I am a survivor of teen dating violence, sexual assault, complex trauma. I first experienced abuse by my very first boyfriend when I was 14 years old, young, innocent, naive, not a concern in the world. And then suddenly one day my life was turned upside down by this abusive boyfriend of mine. And this was the beginning of a lot of my own personal struggles as a teen. I dealt with a lot of anxiety, depression, mental health struggles, never opened up to an adult, a parent, a teacher, anyone at school. And as a result, I really didn't know how to handle what I was going through. That first boyfriend of mine was repeatedly sexually abusive, as well as verbally, emotionally, and psychologically abusive. This led to a lot of other issues with my peers. I experienced severe bullying. I went to a very small school, and that bullying spanned everything from rumors at school to writings on the bathroom wall, prank calls at my parents' house. I was a kid who one day kind of woke up and wondered, why me? Why is all of this happening? And I just felt very alone. And because I didn't open up to anyone, I pretty much turned to every unhealthy coping mechanism that a young person can. Right after my assault, first turned to alcohol for the first time in my parents' liquor cabinet to try to soothe the sadness that I was feeling. I started developing a lot of body image and self-esteem issues because of the abuse. I would stare in the mirror and pick myself apart, and that led to a lot of disordered eating habits. I would binge one day and then think I was fat and not eat for 3. I went from being a straight A student who loved school to basically almost failing every single class. I wasn't getting involved in extracurriculars. I just had such a negative mindset. I mean, every day I felt very helpless and hopeless at times. And eventually it even got to the point where I was so depressed that I had a lot of suicidal thoughts. I was self-harming, I was cutting, and like I said, just felt very alone. And unfortunately, because I never sought help, because I was struggling, those behaviors, those habits, those coping patterns only continued. And that relationship was just one of many abusive relationships and really one of many years of struggle. From the age of 14 to 20, my life was just kind of one big mess after another. Eventually, I found myself in college and I was in yet another abusive relationship, and that one completely turned my life upside down. I lost all connection with any friends I had, my family. He drained my bank accounts, forced me to drop out of college. We were homeless for a while. And again, I wondered, why me? Why is this my life? Am I just destined to be a victim? Just couldn't see any greener grass anywhere. And unfortunately, that relationship ended with a pretty severe physical attack. And that was kind of the end of that phase of my life. And I can't really explain why everything came to an end at that point, other than there was one moment where just my entire mindset changed. By that point, I had gone through so much trauma and so much abuse, and I was only 19 years old, very much alone in the world. And when I left the courthouse, the day that my partner was arraigned after attacking me, I remember I stood outside and I just kind of took this deep breath. And I looked to my right. And this moment is so vivid to me because when I looked to my right, I realized I was entirely alone. And it was the first time in about 2 years that this boyfriend, this ex-boyfriend that was now behind bars, wasn't right here, right next to me, kind of dictating my every move. I got so used to filtering every thought, decision, choice I made through him, making sure he was happy, making sure I didn't upset him, always just so cautious. And suddenly he wasn't here. And I realized I could do anything I wanted in that moment. It's going to sound so ridiculous and trivial, but I thought to myself, I can go get an iced coffee right now and not get yelled at because I didn't get one for him. Like these little things suddenly became this immense feeling of freedom and relief and opportunity. And I started just in that moment analyzing everything I had thrown away. It suddenly felt like a complete joke that I'd lost everything because of this boyfriend. I mean, even just the fact that I dropped out of school, my career, my goals, my life savings, every birthday check from grandma, all of it was gone, and I had nothing left. And for whatever reason, rather than in that moment thinking, why me, this rock bottom should have been more proof that I was somehow meant to fail, I just felt filled with opportunity. I knew I had nothing left, and I finally thought, well, then this is a blank slate. No one knew I was there. My family didn't know where I was at that moment. I just didn't exist to anybody in the world. But I saw so clearly that I hadn't been living for 2 years. And then even more so, I realized I hadn't been living my whole young adult life. I had spent years letting my peers and all of these external influences choose my life for me. And I was just determined to change everything. And while the journey to rebuilding my life was challenging, it wasn't easy. I didn't just wake up the next day healed. It did change the trajectory of my life from that moment forward. I changed my perspective, my thinking. I was, rigid about setting boundaries and practicing self-care and figuring out what I wanted to do in life. Because part of that whole loss was also losing me in the process. And so that kind of took me down the path to working with teens. And it's the path that has essentially brought me here with all of you today. And while I don't want to talk too much about myself, really briefly, I'll just give you a little vision of kind of what followed, because I never imagined that my past would inform my purpose. I always thought I was destined to be a victim, but now I really believe I was destined to be a survivor. And so just really briefly to explain how I now speak nationally in schools, this is kind of in a few quick pictures, the journey that followed. So one of the first things I did is I knew I wanted to raise awareness about dating violence, sexual assault, and I started volunteering with my local agency. It was them who asked me if I'd be willing to speak and share my story. And I was absolutely terrified. I thought I was going to be judged. I was afraid of what people would think of me. But I ended up telling my story at this community event. And so many people came up from the audience and shared their experiences their children had gone through. And I knew I had to keep speaking. And from this moment forward, I began speaking every chance I could in school, in colleges, and looking for stages. Somehow the universe was also sending me opportunities, and I was told about this local pageant. And they said, if you win, there's thousands of college scholarship dollars to win, which I needed, and I would get the chance to dedicate my year to a cause of my choice. And I ended up, to my surprise, winning the title. I made 120 appearances talking about dating violence awareness. That was my service issue. And I earned over $6,500 to go back to college with. I got involved in women's empowerment organizations. I started a nonprofit with a group of women my age. I was lobbying for policy change in Washington, D.C. I helped pass a bill in Massachusetts to pass a brand new law. And I was finally realizing who I was, and that my passion was for primary prevention, social justice, and really communications and advocacy. And so finally, I did return to school despite dropping out. And 7 years after dropping out with a failing GPA, I didn't just graduate, I graduated as valedictorian of my class with a degree in criminal justice. And ever since that point, and even prior, victim services and primary prevention and working with specifically at-risk youth has just been my whole purpose and mission in life. And now I do speak full-time every single week across the country, speaking to everyone from students to the military, service providers. As you heard, I launched a nonprofit that collects stories from survivors across the globe. And I even launched a youth life coaching agency to really help teens and young adults at these vulnerable ages. So, a lot of the issues that I faced when I was younger, these are not issues unique to me. Unhealthy relationships, bullying, self-esteem, anxiety, depression, these still exist today. And if anything, at even higher rates. And in many cases, social media has exacerbated all of these issues. And I'd love to take a moment to just kind of talk about social media use today. Let's talk about a few numbers. So, it should be no surprise that most young people, most teens, and we're really kind of looking in that 13 to 18 age group right here, 97% of them use the internet every day. These are the most recent stats that we have. They just came out in 2022. And nearly half of young people today say that they use social media almost constantly, or use the internet, almost constantly. What sites are they using? Well, the top sites include YouTube at 95% of young people using it, TikTok, Instagram, Snapchat, and some use Facebook. And then following this, you also have teens who use things like Tumblr and Twitter and a few other different sites, Reddit. So teens are on kind of all the major sites. And of these top sites, 35% of young people say that they are using them at least one almost constantly every day. So nothing huge and surprising, but social media is used by young people and it's used quite frequently. Now, there's all kinds of data as to whether what the average daily use is and whether social media is a good or a bad thing. And I think it's important just for us to start the conversation today by acknowledging that social media really is kind of, there's a fly in my room. Social media is in and of itself pretty neutral. It's neither good nor bad. It's really how we use it. And kind of like we said up front, social media serves many different purposes and objectives. It's going to have different results based on who's using it. And the effects on teens are multifaceted and very nuanced. There are some teens who, will say that social media is resoundingly positive. Many young people use it for access to information, access to other people. They feel a greater sense of connection. There's greater learning opportunities, more information. And many young teens find social media to be a source of support and community. If any of you have kids who are gamers, that's a huge place where they might have more friends in the gaming world than they do in the real world. Well, to them that is the real world, but in the outside world, in-person world. And so there's a lot of positives to social media, but there are, as we know, a lot of negatives too. Young people are using not just social media, but smartphones and technology at significantly high rates. And there's all kinds of research that shows how this negatively impacts young people. It can lead to chronic sleep deprivation. Today, nearly half of today's teens sleep less than 7 hours a night, which I think is not that bad because that's pretty much what I'm doing these days. But we know that young people are supposed to get between 8, 9, and 10, depending on their age. And, a lack of sleep impacts their cognitive abilities, their school performance, their social emotional functioning, their interpersonal skills. And all of this also leads to those mental health struggles there are correlations between social media and anxiety, depression, loneliness, detachment, distraction, codependence, and kind of this loss of just who they are to the technology that's at their fingertips. So let's kind of break this down a little bit further, because I think, we all kind of know those generalities, but let's kind of talk about how, kind of the how everyday social media causes harm. Because like I said up front, we're not necessarily talking about predators and cyber crimes. We're talking about just everyday social media use. So let's, I'm going to run through a few, and I think we'll start with the most common, the one that we probably all think of right away, which is this idea of cyberbullying. Essentially, what is cyberbullying? It's exactly what you would think. It's bullying in the online electronic world. I would say that I very minutely experienced cyberbullying because back then we had AOL Instant Messenger. And I can remember being cyberbullied by my peers making up constant fake usernames and messaging me through them. Ashley B has an STD. I mean, you name it, awful things. They would message me, they would message other people pretending to be me. So that was the extent of it. But of course, back then, someone trying to be a troll and be a bully online might have only reached a handful of people. Nowadays, teens, all being on social media, can post something online, and when I say how long, when I ask a group of teens, how long do you think it would take for a rumor to spread online? They all say minutes or an hour. I've never heard longer than an hour. So, somebody can send, post, share negative, harmful, false, mean content about someone else online, and peers learn about it in an instant. There's also a lot of added layers to this too, where comments are really hate-based, where there's racism and sexism and other forms of hate speech. There's even popular apps that kind of come and go in communities, one being called Yik Yak, where teens can post anything anonymously at all times. And I've seen some of the worst cases of racism and sexism and just inappropriate jokes and comments on those sites. And so this can happen on the internet. It can happen through text messaging apps, online forums. I've even heard about young people bullying through Google Classroom chat rooms before teachers caught on and started monitoring them during the pandemic. I heard about teens being bullied during a virtual class, or even being abused and harassed and bothered by their abusive dating partner in the chat function. So it can happen in various forms. And for those teens who aren't necessarily being bullied, they all witness it. I do a lot of focus groups, and I'll say, tell me the issues. Do you see cyberbullying? And they all roll their eyes, and they really see this as drama. But it's lots of just toxic and negative information that's kind of flooding into their lives. Many don't know what to do. They passively observe, or they, will end up engaging because they don't want to be left out. They don't know if they should share it, report it. So it's really challenging, even if you're not the direct recipient of bullying. And in the US, there have been some studies around the rates of cyberbullying. So in the US, nearly half of teens between the ages of 13 and 17 have experienced at least one of the top 6 forms of cyberbullying. And not surprisingly, the top one is name calling, the most common offensive name calling and kind of verbal bullying. And as we know, online victimization has been proven to be directly associated with increased rates of self-harm, suicidal thoughts, and in the worst case scenarios, some teens have even taken their lives because of it. Another way that social media can, my computer's glitchy. Another way that social media can be harmful is it can be a tool for control. And I bring this up because this is something that I see very frequently in my work. I mentioned that I am a survivor of dating violence. And as hard as this might be to believe, statistically, 1 in 3 teenagers will experience abuse by a partner. It might not be physical or sexual, but it could be verbal, emotional, and psychological. And essentially, a partner who is abusive like that will use social media and technology to be controlling. This can look like someone who is constantly texting and blowing up someone's phone and demanding they answer it right now, get right back to them. And maybe this isn't a dating partner. Often teens will say, "Can your best friend act like this?" And they absolutely can. One thing we do see in young people's dating relationships is their partner might ask for their passwords. They might ask them to share their location now that they're dating. They will again kind of use social media as a threat to bully them. They'll say, "I'll post this private information about you if you try to break up with me." They expect on-demand access. In many cases, they'll even want proof. "Oh, Ashley, you're with Melissa? Well, send me a picture, show me so I know. Take a picture of where you are right now." And some teens will even go so far as stalking. So, a lot of young people will use technology as a tool to be very controlling. And when you're on the receiving end of such behaviors, it is exhausting. It is a lot to try to keep up with. If you're afraid to make someone upset, if someone's constantly trying to reach you, it makes it impossible to focus on yourself, your homework, your extracurriculars, when you're constantly checking your phone out of anxiety and panic. And so that is a really big one that many people often don't think of. But teens today are in toxic relationships and friendships, and so this stuff is very common. The other big one that I think should come as no surprise is this idea of comparison. And this can happen in many different ways. And I'll just talk briefly about some of the most common. So we've all heard of the concept of FOMO. And for teens, social media is a very core primary cause of FOMO. And if you've never heard of this term, it's the fear of missing out. And so essentially, they will go online, they will see everybody else out having fun, and it leads them to believe that where they are is not good enough. It creates a lot of anxiety. It's almost like this belief that they'll be happier somewhere else than in the present moment. So maybe they see a group of friends out to lunch and they start to feel left out. That can lead to a lot of inner spiraling. "I wasn't invited. What if they're talking about me? What if they have inside jokes without me now?" Or they might even see something that's happening that also causes them anxiety, kind of this fear that they're going to miss out on something that's happening in the future. And this can be challenging because, as we know, anxiety is a very big issue among today's teens. And anxiety is a forward-thinking emotion. And social media and technology in many ways takes young people and takes people of all ages out of their present moment, which leads to so many mental health issues. If you can't be present and grounded and mindful and with the people that you're with, this just creates a lot of negative inner emotions. And, it's like this constant feeling of chasing something versus just being content right now in the present. I once knew a girl who was a teen who I worked with. She was on vacation with her family. And when I was asking her how it went, apparently one day did not go well. She opened up her Instagram, saw that her friends were out. It caused her just to spiral. She suddenly felt like she was missing out. She got into an argument with her family. She just totally couldn't be present in the moment or enjoy her time with them. Another thing that I hear quite often too is that going on social media makes a lot of teens feel like they're not doing enough. It looks like everyone is being productive all the time, being active, being busy, out having fun, being social, and that creates a lot of anxiety in young people. This idea that like I'm not doing enough. I need to somehow get out of bed and go do things, and it creates a lot of negative inner feelings. Of course, we know being online can lead to a lot of comparison. and self-image and self-esteem issues, whether that's body image and kind of just enjoy, loving your looks and who you are as you are, even down to something like inadequacy, kind of like what I was just saying with everyone's highlight reels. There's constant messages and images when a teen opens, say, Instagram. And for the most part, these days, everything is meticulously edited. Young people are using photoshopping apps, making themselves look tanner, thinner, photoshopping out blemishes and zits on their faces and making themselves have longer eyelashes. And that creates a lot of inadequacy. People compare their looks, but also their accomplishments. And rather than this producing anxiety, these types of things produce the opposite end of the spectrum, which is the feelings of depression. Now, I'm not sure how many of you followed the news that closely or saw this recently, but there was a huge breakthrough in 2021 where a woman who worked at Facebook became known as the whistleblower, who basically put Facebook's operations into the headlines. And basically, it was found out that Facebook had all of these data and reports indicating that they knew young people, teens especially, were using their social media, and also that it was having a negative impact on them. But worse, they were actually creating algorithms that continued to create further harm. Additionally, federal guidelines are that you have to be at least 13 to be on social media sites. But shortly after this report was leaked, Facebook somehow had 600,000 accounts of individuals under the age of 13 that they suddenly had to delete that they didn't catch. So there are very young people on there. They knew that young people were creating fake accounts that their parents didn't know about. And essentially what they were doing was they were designing these algorithms that just made teens spiral. So something as simple as, I'm a teen who looks up healthy recipes, and suddenly now I'm being shown image after image, link after link, and it was actually leading to behaviors of eating disorders and promoting anorexia. And this led to some real life stories where families are now suing Meta, the Facebook company, because of exactly what these algorithms did, and Facebook knowingly did it. And I want to just kind of read a few things that came out of that Facebook report, because I think this is critical for parents to know, that it's not just inherent in social media use, it's also by design. These companies are profit driven, and sometimes it's at the expense of people's health. And so in the document from Facebook researchers themselves, they reported 66% of teenage girls on Instagram and 40% of teenage boys experience negative social comparisons. 52% of teenage girls who experienced negative social comparison on Instagram said it was caused by images related to beauty. Social comparison is far worse on Instagram because it is perceived as real life, but it's based on celebrity standards. Social comparison also mimics the grief cycle and includes a downward emotional spiral, encompassing the range of emotions from jealousy to self-proclaimed body dysmorphia. Facebook addiction, which we call problematic use, is most severe in teens, peaking at age 14. This is language from their own researchers and their own internal reports. So they are aware of this, and in light of this information, chose not to do anything about it, not to change its standards. In fact, they tried to create Facebook for kids and all these other things. So by design, a lot of these sites are leading young people who are already vulnerable to further vulnerabilities. Another thing that shouldn't come as a surprise is just this idea of, kind of compulsive social media use. I'm sure we all recognize that we kind of tend to do it ourselves. You're in line waiting for coffee, you pick up and scroll. You're, standing somewhere and you just kind of open. And before you know it, you've been on for a long time. Today's teens, as far as like average daily screen time, it varies. But for the most part, the most recent data from 22 says that tweens, so kids between the ages of 8 to 12, average 5 hours of screen time a day. For teens who are 13 to 18, they're averaging 8 hours of screen time a day. And when you do the math on how many hours they're awake and in school, this is basically every waking minute. They're going to school, checking in between classes. They get home, they only have about 8 or 9 hours left before they go to bed. So they're constantly on. In fact, in 2022, it was found that your average teen spent 113 minutes a day just on TikTok alone. So almost 2 hours just watching TikTok videos. And, the nature of social media is that it is constant stimulation. And again, this makes it really hard to just be present, to rest one's mind. Like I said earlier, research has connected chronic social media use with a lot of sleep issues, especially sleep issues before bed. Today's young people, 40% say that they use their phone within 5 minutes of going to bed. But I think even more alarming is that 36% say that they wake up at least once throughout the night to check their phone. Can you imagine waking up to check your notifications in the middle of the night? I don't even like waking up to use the bathroom. So it is chronic, it is always on, and that is not good for their mental health. We all know you need to shut off and have space to pause and to renew your mind. For many, social media is also a coping tool. It can be used for avoidance. It's a detachment strategy. It displaces their energy. It takes away from other vital activities. If you have kids who struggle to do the simplest things, often they'll go on their phone and you might wonder why. And for the most part, they're usually just trying to avoid some unwanted emotion. Taking out the trash doesn't sound fun, so I'm going to pick up my phone and keep putting it off. Or homework sounds stressful, I'm going to pick up my phone. And this is not something unique to teens. I find myself doing it. I'm just more aware of it. But this is very common. You will notice that kids will avoid and they will go on their phone and they will just get stuck for an hour, 2 hours. And depending on whether your kids listen or not, they might never get to that simple activity that you ask them to do. And then I think the last one I want to discuss is kind of this idea that social media in and of itself builds codependence. Teens are constantly looking for validation. They make all of their choices in their life based on what they think will be accepted. That is just the inherent nature of being a young person. They're trying to fit in, they're trying to be accepted, make friends, feel belonging, and they're in a world where they really just don't know who to be. And this type of approval-seeking behavior is not only harmful in the present moment, but also for the future. A lot of young people assign their own value to the amount of likes on a photo. This is a true thing. You've probably seen it if you have teens. Kids will post a picture of themselves, and if they check it an hour later and it only has a certain number of likes and they feel embarrassed by that, they will delete the photo. So they're constantly seeking this external validation online. And when they do get, let's say, a significant number of likes, well, that creates these dopamine hits in the brain. It's a high. They want to chase that. They want to get that again. And then suddenly when their next post doesn't do too well, it can be this downward spiral. What's wrong with me? I'm not good enough. I'm not pretty enough. I'm not this enough. And this trying to please everyone and trying to be liked, it is unattainable and unsustainable. And this leads to a lot of negative self-imagery, low self-esteem. It leads to a whole bunch of inner turmoil that again leads to anxiety and depression. And really, in many ways, it leads to this kind of loss of self. right? This loss of one's own identity. Your child doesn't remember all the things that make them great, their talents, their uniqueness. Suddenly now, making everybody else happy is kind of their sole focus. So, like I said, this is such a complex and multifaceted subject, but these are kind of the main ways that just everyday social media use, little interactions, impact our young people. This is what leads to all those negative consequences. And so in the interest of time, let's talk about what adults can do, some practical tips, and then we'll open it up to a few questions. So, I think this is part of the missing piece. We can read all the grisly headlines. We can, know the facts, but often the question is, well, what can I do? How do I talk to my child about social media without them shutting me down? How do I not be the bad parent because I'm, trying to control my kids' social media use? Let's just go through a few that I have found to be very helpful. I do work with teens. I understand their perspectives, their barriers with their parents, and also what's worked. I've worked with families and helped them kind of collaborate on these issues. And these are some of the things that I would recommend. So the first one is to really just educate your child. The same way you would try to educate them about proper nutrition or how to tie their shoes, social media is no exception. You have to sit down and talk to them about the importance of safe social media use, healthy habits, and kind of just doing what I said in the beginning, teaching them that social media is not a bad thing. It's just all in how you use it. Talk to them about the positives, talk about the benefit of connecting with people, and really let them see social media as a tool. Thankfully for me, social media showed up when I was rebuilding my life, and I really saw it as a way to have a living, breathing resume. I was promoting good work that I was doing. I was speaking out on causes. I was building my resume and letting the world see it, and a lot of opportunities came my way. I was following people who inspired me, role models, people I could learn from. And so those are the things you want to teach them. Then you want to also talk to them about how social media can make you feel not so good about yourself. That sometimes you might open your Instagram and find that you see someone's post and you don't feel that great, or suddenly you think you need to change something. Just giving them the awareness that that's what social media does can be immensely helpful. You want to have conversations around this. And, many teens don't want to talk about themselves. So I always say, frame it in the larger perspective for them. Ask them, do you ever see this at school? Are your friends on Instagram? What's it like? Interestingly, there's been studies where kids say social media does not negatively impact them, but then when they're asked, do you think it negatively impacts teens? The numbers are huge. So, maybe you kind of give it a third party external angle. And also while you're talking to them, have compassion and understanding. Know that they don't want to be left out. Know that these are big parts of their lives. Just kind of relating to them is going to really open the door for future conversations. I think also what's really important is this second one, which is really empowering them. Part of what we want to cultivate in young people is a sense of their own autonomy and their own leadership and decision-making abilities. Every teen is striving to have their own level of independence, and we want to teach them to self-regulate. So part of it is really just empowering them to think about, how do you want to feel about social media? What do you want your relationship to be like? A lot of teens know that they use social media too much. They just don't really know how to go about changing it. They want to use it less. So that might be a conversation with, having them set some boundaries. How many hours a day do you want to use it? Encourage them to turn on that notification on your phone where you can see what your weekly numbers are, your average daily screen time. Kind of promote that feeling of self-regulation and independence in them to really just be empowered over their own social media. And what do boundaries look like? Well, that could be, I don't use my phone between 5 and 7. I only use Instagram 20 minutes a day. There's ways that you can help them really figure out how they want to curate their feed. I don't want to follow these types of accounts. I will block this when I see it. all of that really puts the ball in their court versus it making it seem like you're the mean parent who's like not allowing them to go online. The third piece is also making this collaborative. So you want to cultivate healthy habits within your home, and you also want to role model this yourself. So, this could be something like having, screen limits as a family. Maybe you also have your weekly screen time and you share your numbers every Sunday and you compare. Maybe you also have your own targets and there's a bit of accountability. A lot of families will do things like phone-free Fridays or like Thursday game nights, and everybody puts their phones away. If you can make this collaborative, that's really, really positive, and kind of teaches kids how to do like a digital detox, where they can take breaks and they feel really good and they can be present. And for those teens who have tried to just unplug, they love it. There's been kids that say the best thing they did for their mental health was just being alone, unplugging from their friends, spending some quiet time. So teaching them and showing them the value, making this a habit, it'll be easier for them to do it on their own. Of course, as a parent, you want to be observant. That means observing everything from red flags to how they use their social media. What is the difference between healthy social media or normal social media addiction versus concerning addiction? Well, when you notice that your child's social media, phone technology use is starting to influence their everyday activities, maybe they don't engage with their friends as much, they like to just be in their room more, they aren't doing as well in school, they're having a hard time focusing, that might be when you start to have conversations. And part of it too is witnessing their social media usage, pointing out when they've been on their phone the entire car ride, having them to put it down. A lot of parents ask, well, should I monitor my kids' social media? You absolutely can monitor. You don't want to be a helicopter parent and check in every day, but kind of them know that you'll spot check and make sure that they're using it appropriately. And again, this is just like, at one point in time, you had to help them cross the street and you'd hold their hand. If they're away on a trip, you might ask them to check in. It's the same thing. The internet is not always a safe place, and you just need to remind them that as their parent, part of your job is to make sure that they're okay. And hopefully by talking about this openly, if they ever come across something, if there's ever a problem, they will then turn to you. They'll be empowered and have their own voice and know that they can talk to you about it. And then lastly, I think something that we can do that's really positive is helping young people bridge the connection between social media use and their feelings. So getting a young person to really look at the fact that, maybe they don't have the highest level of confidence. Maybe they struggle with their self-image and, their body image and their eating habits. Maybe have conversations and help them see this is because, you probably saw this online. And, the social media is never the actual cause. The cause is what social media causes to happen in our brains, right? We see something and we think about it. We assign meaning to it. We think, well, I don't look good enough. And it's really getting them to bridge the gap between something they're doing, witnessing, experiencing, and the feeling that it's causing them. And if you can talk about it and unpack it and ask them, what are the thoughts that go through your head when you see these things, when this is happening? Often you can allow them to almost externalize their own experience and hopefully realize the connection between their social media use and how they feel.
Ashley, we have some questions. Can we,
Yep.
Now a good time to hop in with those?
That is perfect. Yep.
Great. Okay, so let's start with one that I know probably every parent on here wants to know the answer to. How do you limit screen time for teens? Because, as this person says, I tried different techniques, including disabling internet with no success. It makes them aggressive to get the internet access back.
I think it's really hard if your kid is already using social media, because now it seems like you're being mean, you're trying to punish them. To them, this is normal. There's nothing wrong with it. So again, I think, it's hard. It's hard to take social media time away. So I think part of it is, how can you make it collaborative? How can you have a conversation around it that doesn't make it feel like you're enforcing rules, but rather, let's make sure that we have time for family. Let's make sure you have time for homework. Point out those vital things that they're not doing when they're on social media, because kids have responsibilities. They have plenty of things they could be doing all day. There's a reasonable expectation of how long they should be online. I think, social technology is a tool, not a toy. And so it's not something that we should just play with all day long. And it might take a lot of coaxing, but I think try to approach it with compassion, understanding, not trying to be too punitive, and hopefully over time they'll be willing to work a little bit with you. But again, it's easier said than done, but yeah, try to make it collaborative.
Yeah, the collaborative is key. And you can also use the other tools that you have, to maybe the internet goes off, or that you're monitoring how long they're on a particular app. But as someone said in the chat, they often find ways around it. Even the parents who say my kids don't get social media, they find ways around it. So the collaboration is so important, because you want them to learn how to use this responsibly. So that's where the constant conversations come in, and balancing the positive and negative. Because if they think you don't get it as a parent, how important social media is in their eyes, then they will tune you out and they won't listen to anything.
Absolutely.
I love the collaboration is key. Okay, somebody else is asking kind of the same thing. What can parents do? Limits on usage, ban use of social media, parental monitoring. Let's actually talk about that, the monitoring part of it, because you did say observe what they're doing. So what does that look like in your eyes, like from your perspective?
I think, honestly, I think this also comes down to your child. There are some kids that you can trust, that is using social media in a healthy way. But there is always this inherent risk. Kids come across images they shouldn't see, videos they shouldn't see. And so I think if there's a healthy balance, that every once in a while I'm going to check in, just make sure everything looks good on your phone. I think that's part of being a parent. Some parents actually have contracts with their kids once they get a cell phone of, this is what you're allowed to do. This is what you agree to, that I have access to your social media accounts, that I'm going to friend you. I promise I won't comment and be your mom commenting on your Instagram, but we're going to connect. So I think it's really custom based on your child and the level of monitoring, so to speak, that you think you need. But I don't think that there's anything wrong with it. You are the parent. They are young. Their, brain has not fully developed yet in the ways that they can use it responsibly. And I think you should liken it the same way you would to teaching them how to drive, teaching them how to tie their shoes. It's just another thing that they need your guidance on.
Very true. And I just want to point out the difference between monitoring and spying. Spying, they aren't aware of it. Monitoring, they are. So I always suggest that you sit down with your child and look through it, versus grabbing it when they put it on the charger at night and scrolling through. Because you want to build trust with your kids. You want this to be collaborative. And if they find out that you're scrolling through their phone every night, then it really becomes a point of contention, and they will stop talking to you and have conversations. And you don't want that when it comes to social media. So just remember that, don't spy, but monitor. All right, let's see. We have another question. Somebody was asking, they said, thank you for sharing your story at the very beginning. What do you think your parents could have done to help you change the trajectory earlier in your life?
I'm so glad this question was asked, because I was going to kind of wrap up with it. I think that in my home, conversations were never completely welcome. We didn't talk about issues. We didn't talk about life. And now that I'm older, I've gone back and, of course, analyzed every moment of my entire life and why I am who I am. And when I think about the first time that I needed my parents and struggled with something, I was in second grade. I noticed I was being treated differently than this other little girl at school. And I went home and I asked my parents, am I ugly? And they very typically said, Ashley, what are you talking about? Of course not. You're beautiful. Why would you think that? And that was it. But to me, that was a moment to open a dialogue, to go deeper, to keep asking questions. And many years later, the first time I was bullied, same advice, Ashley, just ignore them and they'll stop. And so I never felt like if I went to them, there would be support. And in many ways, my parents were just uninformed and really kind of ignorant about the issues I was going through. They didn't recognize the red flags. Me fighting with them wasn't me being rebellious. There were other things going on. So I think it's one, foster conversations, even over the most trivial, silly things, because when the big things happen, your kid will come to you. And the other piece is if anything ever seems off, if there's any changes, just ask, check in, because I was begging for someone to notice. And when even my own parents didn't seem to notice, I felt even more alone. So conversations and paying attention to red flags for sure.
Which is, obviously you went through something pretty traumatic, but it also ties into tonight about social media, that we have to have those conversations. And notice we're saying conversations, not lectures. We want to have the conversations. We want to get curious. We want to see how they see the world, what they're going through, and open up those conversations with no judgment, so that they know they can come and they can get more than, why do you care? What's the big deal? Why are you doing that? We don't, because all of those questions are pretty judgmental if you think about it. So we need to kind of back off and see it from their perspective.
Yeah. Yeah, and this is not a one-time conversation either. It's,
Yes.
The social media talk at 12 is different from the one at 16. So it's an ongoing process.
Absolutely. Very good point. Does anybody have any other questions before we wrap it up for tonight? If so, you can just pop those straight into the chat. Someone's asking, do you have any particular advice for parents of girls?
Yeah, I think the biggest challenge is to cultivate, especially in young girls, a true sense of identity, authenticity, self-worth, and values. If we can build that in them, these things will impact them far less. If we celebrate our daughter's talents, her intelligence, her skills, then the value emphasis on things like looks won't be something that might impact her as much. I think we just have to really help teens, young girls especially, be authentic, embrace who they are, love who they are. And then this way, if someone rejects them, they're going to say, okay, I'm just not for you. I don't need to please everyone. These other people like me. Or if, this person makes a comment, they're going to say, I don't mind my curly hair. So we just need to really build that true sense of identity, value, self-worth, so that it's not externally validated. So again, harder process to do than it is said. But if we can just focus on constantly celebrating who they are, hopefully they grow up to be more strong and empowered and more unlikely to fall victim to some of these traps.
I love that. Okay, another question. If my 12-year-old son hasn't been exposed yet to social media, at what age do you recommend that it's introduced?
Again, I think this is, I think it can be subjective. There have been studies of what is the right age for boys, for girls. I feel like some level of maturity is always helpful. It's a little bit different with boys because while yes, they still compare and struggle with their own self-esteem and body image, it's not like it is for girls. So, I think allowing them to be healthy teenagers without social media for as long as possible is always the best way to go. Maybe you kind of phase them in. Maybe they first get a phone just so you can reach them. But again, that's going to depend on who your son is. If he seems responsible and if he doesn't seem that interested in social media anyway, maybe that you can give him a phone at the age of 13. But I think if I had to pick an age, I would say sophomore, junior year. Kind of let them get through freshman year of high school, which is really when a lot of the peer interactions and social pressures start. If they can get through that and have a pretty good head on their shoulders and seem okay, maybe sophomore, junior year, they'd be ready to handle it.
Right. Very true. Okay, so I think that's all the questions. If anybody has follow-up questions, you can always email us those follow-up questions and we can get to those. And we will be sending out a follow-up email with some of the resources, some of this information, and an access to the recording as well. I will let you know that we talked a lot about having that collaboration, having the conversation. So I will actually include in the follow-up, if it's okay with Val and Anu, a link to a social media or a screen time course that I have that would be helpful, I think, for people, that is meant at small videos for the kids to do with parents. So it will start the conversations like Ashley is talking about. All right, that's awesome, everybody. Thank you, Ashley, so much for all of the information and for the great overview. If everyone can give her some reactions down below, we would love that. Just send her some hearts or some claps. We really, really appreciate you doing this, especially since you're on the East Coast, right? So it's late for you over there. Are you a night owl normally anyway?
I am. I've been getting better. I'm prioritizing sleep. You know, it's part of my own wellness plan, but yeah, no, this is a great reason to stay up.
Thank you. Thank you. All right, everybody, before you pop out, if you will, as we always ask in the chat box, just leave something that kind of you learned tonight or an aha moment or something that made you think so that we know what you got out of tonight. Thank you, everyone. And we will see you in a few weeks. Val, maybe you can pop in what the next parent chat is. I don't remember. I apologize. I always get so in the moment. I forget what the next thing is. But Val, do you want to come on real quick and say?
Unmute. Sorry.
There you go.
Our next parent chat is for Spanish-speaking families, talking about how do you get your kids to listen to you? How do you improve your communication? So this is a parent chat that will be in Spanish. Liliana Medina from Sistema Escolar will be there, along with a known author, Laura Lyles Reagan. And they will have a worksheet for you, and they will work through this. If you are already registered as part of Parent Chat, you will get more information on it. And if you would like to share it with others, you can share the registration at www.lwsf.org/parentchat. They can sign up, and we will get them information. It's going to be a bit exciting for me since I have first grade level Spanish, and I'll be behind the scenes, but hey, you know what? It's an awesome time to try something out. So, so I hope that you can share the word on this, our first Spanish language parent chat in Spanish for Spanish-speaking families. And again, it's all about communication. Both Sherry and Ashley were spot on the need to improve and strengthen communication before you need to have the hard talks.
Absolutely. Yeah, so thank you, Val, for dropping in. I forgot that was our next one, which is going to be exciting. And please spread the word, because we need to have good numbers for that so we can continue to have parent chats in Spanish. And because we obviously want to serve more people and be here for more people. So thank you, everyone. With that, we're going to say good night, and we will stay in touch, and we'll see you at the next parent chat. Good night, everyone.